Hi, welcome to Perp Miniatures. So, why would you want to build smaller Goliaths? Because it gives a visual difference to the gang. The bullies are the lowest rung on the Goliath ladder, and these muscle-bound toddlers would see the smallest among themselves as the weakest. I've already been keeping this in mind with my other models. My Forge Tyrant is the biggest model. Next, the Stimmer is a bit smaller than the Leader, but bigger than a normal Bruiser. And the Bruisers are a bit bigger than the bullies. But not only am I making these bullies smaller, I tend to kit these fighters out with fairly generic weapons, often repeating some of the equipment between a few models. So something else I'll be doing is kitbashing custom spud-jackers for all of these bullies. To start the first bully, I grabbed the World Eater Jackals kit and cut a body from the sprue, assembling it per the instructions. I'm using the Jackal bodies since they're slightly smaller than the normal Goliath bodies, and they have both male and female presenting options. Then I hopped into making a custom spud-jacker for this model. For this one, I wanted to make a giant socket wrench, so I snipped a cleaver from the Goliath gang kit and cut the axe blade off. To make the head of the wrench, I went back to the sprue and cut one of the small circle parts from the actual sprue off. Then I trimmed one end so it was rounded along the circular part. Before attaching the head of the wrench to the arm, I tried to make the actual socket opening by drilling out a hole and roughly widening it with my X-Acto blade. It didn't really look like an actual wrench head, but I think with the scale of the model it looks fine. After making some small adjustments to both sides, I pinned the parts and glued them together with a bit of sprue glue. I tested how the arm would sit against the torso and glued it to the body using some sprue glue to fill in any gaps. This model was going to be equipped with a grenade as well, but I didn't think that the grenade holding arm from the Goliath kit was as dynamic as fit this model. To fix this, I clipped a corpse grinder culled arm wielding a boning sword from the sprue. I cut the boning sword from either side of the hand with my X-Acto blade. Then I clipped a set of grenades meant to attach to a Goliath belt and split the two grenades apart with my X-Acto blade. I checked how the grenade would look in the hand and cut the bottom of the grenade handle away carefully so I didn't lose the smaller piece of the handle since I'd still be using that. Next, I carefully drilled holes into the handle for pinning. I glued the grenade into place, then glued the bottom piece of the handle I just cut away to the bottom of the hand, while the top part was still drying so I could adjust both parts to look like they were in line with one another. Once this dried, I attached the arm to the body using some sprue glue to fill in some of the gaps. There was still a large hole left on the front of the shoulder, which I'll fill later in the build. For the head, I went back to the Goliath gang kit and cut out a head with a short mohawk. Since I was making these Goliaths smaller than the base Goliaths, I thought it was fitting that the mohawks of these models were also smaller than the higher ranking members of the gang. I assembled the head as normal, and then trimmed the neck of both the head and body down so the connection was flat between the two parts. Then I drilled holes for pinning and glued them together. The rest of my Goliath gang uses stone face parts on them, and I wanted to bring in that visual on these models as well. So I grabbed this stone face basing kit from Bad Squiddo Games and took out a few options. I trimmed the stone face down a bit so it would sit flat against the back of the model without sticking out too far. After checking that it fit well and covered up the big gap on the back of the model, I glued it into place using some super glue. If you're enjoying the video so far, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. With this model mostly done, I moved on to the next bully. I grabbed another World Eater Jackal body, assembling it just like before. With this spud-jacker, I wanted to make a channel lock, so I took a chain cleaver wielding arm from the corpse grinder kit. At first, I tried trimming the chain cleaver down a bit and attaching plasticard pieces to make the channel part of the wrench, but it looked really goofy, so I ended up cutting that part off. Ultimately, I ended up drawing out both pieces of the channel locks to make sure I had the parts looking right. To make the main body of the wrench, I cut the curved section of the chain cleaver away and saved that part for later. Then I flattened the top section by scraping with my X-Acto blade so that the other section of the wrench could sit right up against this piece. For the other side of the wrench, I took the cut off piece of the Goliath cleaver from earlier and cut the top shape out of it. After I was happy with how this part was looking, I went back to the cut off piece of the chain cleaver to make the handle for this side of the wrench. I cut both parts at the same angle so they would meld smoothly and glued them together. After gluing both parts of the wrench together, I took a small plasticard rod and cut two small pieces from it to act as the rivet that holds the wrench together. I glued it onto the wrench carefully using a pair of tweezers to place them in the correct spot. After the wrench dried, I made some adjustments to the arm so it sat cleaner against the body and glued it into place with some sprue glue. For the gun arm, I grabbed a pistol-wielding arm from the corpse grinder box, since the Goliath kit doesn't have any right-handed pistol arms, and the corpse grinder box is pretty close in scale. I made some adjustments so the arm sat better against the body, then glued it into place with some sprue glue, adjusting the arm to look like the model was taking a shot. I used a head from the Goliath gang box for the head of this model, gluing the two parts of the head together and testing the fit onto the body. The fit wasn't that great at first, so I trimmed down the neck of both parts. Then I drilled holes for pinning and glued the head on. I cut another stone face bit to make this model a shoulder pad, making sure the part I cut out was noticeably part of a face and glued it on using some super glue. This model had a gap on the backside, so I cut a tank bit from the World Eater Jackals kit, scraped the chaos icons from it, and glued it into place. I then moved on to the last of the bullies, assembling another body from the Jackals kit. For this melee weapon, I wanted to give the bully a crescent wrench, so I grabbed another cleaver from the Goliath gang kit and cut the axe head off of it. Then for the actual heads of the wrench, I cut two small pieces from a plasticard tube. I left one side fully closed like a normal crescent wrench, but to make a better connection point, I carefully cut a flat side on the plasticard tube and glued it into place with some plastic glue. For the open side of the wrench, I repeated the previous step but cut a small section of the tube open before gluing. I made some adjustments to the body and then glued the arm into place using some sprue glue to fill in any gaps. For the gun arm, I grabbed another stub gun wielding arm from the corpse grinder box, made some adjustments to the arm, and glued it into place using some sprue glue. Next, I took a head from the Kill Team Blooded kit. I liked this female presenting head with a short mohawk, since I felt like the hair went along with the rest of my Goliath gang, and similar to how the body size was smaller for the bullies, the hair was also shorter than the others. After trimming the neck down a bit, I pinned both parts and glued them together, making sure to line up the head as if it were looking down the sight of the pistol. Similar to the first bully, this model had an open back, so I trimmed a stone face piece down to fit as a backpack. I then moved on to the bases for these models. I wanted the bases to be fairly industrial, to represent the wrecked ship these Goliaths use as their base. To start, I glued a plasticard I-beam down to one side of this base, then glued a plasticard tube down at an angle. Then I put some super glue down on the base and scattered some of the resin shavings from the stone face bits to represent trash or scrap pieces littering the ground. For the second base, I cut out some diamond plate pattern plasticard sheet and glued it onto the top of the base. Once this dried, I came through with my clippers and trimmed the plasticard along the base, then scraped that flat with the side of my X-Acto blade. After that, I cut two small pieces from a plasticard I-beam and glued those down to one edge of the base in line with each other. Once that dried for a little, I glued a plasticard sheet over the I-beams to make a step. I then clipped the step down, doing my best to cut it in line with the base below. For the last base, I glued a thin strip of plasticard close to one side of the base. Then I cut a couple small pieces from a wider plasticard tube at roughly the same length to one another. Using some sprue glue, I glued these pipes down to the base next to the strip of plasticard. I then glued another thin strip of plasticard next to the pipes to look like some sort of machinery or vent within the ship. Then, to fill in the rest of the base, I cut a piece of diamond plate plasticard and glued it down next to these pipes. After that dried, I trimmed the sides down and scraped the plasticard flat along the base. With all of the bases done, I drilled holes for pinning in all of the models. I tested where the models would sit centered on the bases and drilled a hole where the pin would end up, then glued the models down to their bases with some sprue glue. I still had some gaps to fill on the models, and wanted to add some straps to look like they were really carrying the stone faces on them. So I mixed together some Milliput and started with filling in the front shoulder gap of the model holding a grenade. Looking back at this, I should have used green stuff, or at least mixed some green stuff into the Milliput for this step, since the Milliput was harder to sculpt the organic shapes I was making here. For the straps, I flattened a small amount of Milliput and cut a thin strip from it, Then, I carefully peeled that up and laid it across the body of the model, pressed the ends down under shoulder pads, or melded it into existing belts on the models. While pressing the Milliput down, I did my best not to deform the shape too much, or I would come back through and flatten any side that did get too out of whack with my sculpting tool. After everything dried, I went back through and scraped all of the Milliput flat with the edge of my X-Acto blade. And with that, the models are done. While I paint them, I'll be reading out the backstory for one of these models. The morning shift bell tolled, waking Tess from her slumber. She rolled from the bunk and instinctively stepped further into the room as her roommate crashed down from the upper bunk where she had just been standing. Without a word, the two walked out their door and filed into the line forming in the hall, heading towards the forges deep inside the Middenval. After several long minutes of marching, the air had grown hot as Tess neared the forges. As she donned her furnace plates and grabbed her tools, she approached her station. The Goliath that worked the night shift of her station looked up, soot covering their tired face. Tess could see lash marks across his back, still fresh.
Dropped a bolt. Boss saw and wasn't happy I was slacking.
As he finished tightening the last bolt on some piece of machinery, he stepped away, and without missing a beat, Tess stepped in to replace him. A fresh piece of machinery came down the assembly line, and Tess got to work. The hours pressed on and on. She heard the midday bell ring, followed by fresh Goliaths streaming in to replace some of the others around her. As the hours pressed on, she felt her muscles starting to ache from a long day's work. But just before the evening bell rang, and she would have been able to eat and sleep, an alarm blared, an attack on the settlement. Everyone ran towards the doors, tools still in hand. Squinting in the late afternoon sunlight, she exited the Middenval. Goliaths all around her were loading into trucks and on bikes. She found the nearest open truck bed and hopped in. A moment later, the driver gunned the engine and dust kicked up behind the tires as they raced towards the horizon. Now, adjusted to the bright light, Tess leaned over the cab of the truck to see what they were facing. From the looks of it, a band of Escher jet bikes streamed just above the ground towards the Goliath. Tess heard a guttural yell as Goro Ironflesh came screaming from the dust cloud behind her truck, atop his own bike, and quickly overtook them. As he neared the front of the Goliath forces, he raised one of his pulverizers and yelled once again. This time, the yell echoed across the Goliath, and Tess felt the energy as she too yelled alongside her Vat brethren. Just then, shots of lasfire came peeling through the Goliath forces, and the trucks took evasive actions. Tess felt as she was tossed to one side of the truck, then the other, as the driver swerved to avoid an oncoming jet bike. One of the Goliath in the truck bed raised their stub cannon and took a shot at the jet bike, but only glanced to the side. The Escher sneered back at them, just before her bike exploded as heavy gunfire ripped into the distracted driver. The driver of Tess's truck was then hit by something and lost control of the truck, which flipped hard into the ashy ground. Tess got up quickly, but felt the strain in one leg as she put weight on it. Not broken, but she would feel it tomorrow. She took stock of those around her, no one too badly injured. The driver of the truck was already being helped out of the cab. The chaos of the battlefield was all around her. Dust kicked up by all manner of vehicles made her visibility very low. Escher jet bikes sped past through the gloom. Las rounds streaked in all directions. She felt hopeless. But just then, a heavy footstep sounded behind her. Looking back, she saw the mighty frame of Hullbreach Starborn marching towards her and the Goliath around her. A cheer let up, but was quickly swallowed by the voice of Hullbreach.
With me, we do not yield.
As he waded into battle, Tess quickly followed, seeing the Goliath Forge Tyrant take an Escher off her bike with a burst of bolter fire. When the battle finally came to an end, it was dark out. Tess and the other Goliath picked through the wrecks for surviving Goliath and loaded up onto whatever trucks were still drivable. She felt her eyes grow heavy with sleep while they shipped back to the Middenval, crawling into bed just as the sun came up over the wastes. What felt like a moment later, the morning shift bell rang, and Tess instinctively stepped out of bed in her drowsy state. Then her roommate crashed into her off the top bunk. Laughing loudly to themselves, her roommate walked out of the door, leaving Tess to peel herself off the floor and join the line marching towards the forges. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed your time here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.